leading up to 2021 on cybersecurity. Annual global losses over that same period of time will be around $6 trillion. So while we're spending a lot of money on cybersecurity, it seems we're relying on a lot of the same point solutions that we used in the past. Firewalls, antivirus, tools that hackers have learned to circumvent and work around. And I think Mr. Einstein's quote here is really germane to the conversation we're going to have today. So the security threat landscape, the National Vulnerability Database, which is maintained by NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, a government agency, they've been tracking vulnerabilities since actually back in 1979. But if you look over the past almost 15 years, you can see that there has been a steady increase, especially around 2016, where it trended somewhere around 6,000 vulnerabilities for several years. And all of a sudden, there was a giant spike to almost 16,000 in 2018. Now, we started our program in October of 2015. That was Security Myths 1.0. And over those 4 years, you can see that there has been a 242% increase in the number of vulnerabilities that are out there in the wild, things that you have to address. In that same period of time, security budgets have only increased 25% over the past 4 years. They did go up. I had last reported on 2017 about 10% of IT budgets were allocated to security. Today, that has gone up to 12.5%. So organizations are spending more on security within their budget, but that hasn't grown quite as rapidly as the threat landscape has. So you can see it's fairly significant in terms of what we need to spend. And then it's ever changing, the challenges that we face. I've listed 4 components here, but there are many, many more that could be on this list. Shapeshifter malware, as many organizations have adopted tools like artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics, so have the hackers. So they're starting to leverage the same types of tools to deploy malware. Malware, talking back to command and control. I'm going to walk you through in the next slide a kill chain to show you how shapeshifter malware actually functions. Phishing has gotten much more sophisticated. 61% of all breaches start with a phishing campaign. People still tend to be the weakest link in the security chain. Credential stuffing is something really interesting. What hackers have done with the ability to collect information and parse that information is they start to look through people's social media accounts, as well as past passwords that had been cracked. So if you were part of the Yahoo breach or part of the Equinix breach, they're tracking your usernames and passwords, and they're putting them into these databases that they can use machine learning with to determine what your profile looks like. So did you use your dog's name or your children's name in your passwords? They go into your social media accounts and collect information about you, and it's what's called credential stuffing. They're tracking what type of passwords you would have the proclivity to use. And then quantum computing is on the horizon. We hear about it in our security practice all the time because it's going to be a real game changer in terms of the ability to leverage these tools like artificial intelligence. Google just solved an equation that would have taken a quantum computer, a traditional binary computer, 10,000 years to solve. So if you think about that, economies of scale, we have password cracking tools that can run 3 trillion characters a second. With a quantum computer, you can't even calculate the amount of time it could run those same 3 trillion characters. The big thing on the horizon is that encryption at that point will become obsolete as far as traditional use of encryption. So let me walk you through Shapeshifter. User goes out to a website, downloads a piece of malware, or conversely, opens up a phishing email, clicks on our URL, opens an attachment with a malicious macro, the exploit gets installed. So the machine is compromised. The malware talks back to command and control. It brute forces that particular user account, and that becomes compromised. So at this point, what the hacker wants to do is be able to move laterally across the network and compromise additional systems and additional accounts. At this point, the malware is blocked. So you have security tools in place. Something is preventing the malware from exploiting other systems on the network. And this is where shapeshifter malware comes into play, because what it does is it probes your network and it performs reconnaissance. It collects information about what is blocking that compromise, talks back to command and control that is leveraging these AI and machine learning and big data analysis type of tools, and they modify the code on the fly, push that code out to the malware. The malware then circumvents what's blocking it, gets a privileged account, compromises the domain, and exfiltrates sensitive data. So this is what we're faced with today. There are a number of new attack thresholds. There's a Russian bear, APT, which is an advanced persistent threat. It takes about 18 minutes for it to move laterally across the network. Emotet worm, a lot of these new types of pieces of malware that are out there are leveraging these tools, or starting to leverage these tools. So that's what we're faced with. So looking at the technical side and the threat landscape, what other considerations do we bring into the mix when we're determining how we're going to build out a new managed services model? The first thing we always want to start with is it needs to be standards based, meaning is there a control framework that we feel fits the profile of our particular demographic and our clients? In this case, this is the CIS 20 critical controls. Now, we looked at NIST 853, we look at ISO, we look at COBIT, all of the various control frameworks, and we decided that the CIS 20 critical controls satisfied our requirements on two levels. One, for the SMB space, small and mid-sized companies in particular, there are 172 controls as opposed to over 900 in NIST. So the ability to actually implement the controls and measure the controls is the capability is much more evident. The second component of this is how do we align our tools to this standard-based program? Now, when the NSA developed the 20 critical controls for the DoD back in 2008, every control needs to have had the ability to prevent a breach within the past 2 years. So we liked it from a point of view that it had to demonstrate the ability to prevent a breach. And then it was about finding the proper tools that we could align with the controls to satisfy the control requirements. And our program satisfies 15 of the 20 critical controls. So once we had a standards-based security framework to operate within, we then wanted to crosswalk that to regulatory compliance to make sure that our clients that fell under PCI, HIPAA, NERC, which is energy, DFARS manufacturing, and so on, that the tools would carry over into their compliance requirements as well. And you can see here, I've just crosswalked a few of the 20 critical controls to show you how they satisfy regulatory compliance as well. So for instance, control number 3, vulnerability assessment, we perform continuous monitoring in our program. We are scanning our clients every single day, presenting vulnerability information about the network to them for remediation and deriving security metrics from that. So it not only satisfies the 20 critical controls, but PCI 6.2, 6.1, HIPAA, workstation use, workstation security, SIP, and so on. Next thing to take into consideration is cost. So how do we perform cost modeling? Well, we have to have a baseline and understanding of what kind of a spend what our clients need to put forth in order to build a program on their own. Starts with building a team. And I've listed out security roles and responsibilities. This is not a one-to-one FTE requirement, but these are roles that need to be satisfied to have a complete security team. So CISO, an architect, someone who can align with enterprise architecture to make certain that as you're deploying systems, all of the security controls are put in place. Engineers, analysts, an incident response team, penetration testing, the ability to, across the team, to fulfill each of these roles. Now, in the Rochester metro area, the mean wage for a security analyst is $93,160 unburdened. So there's the first baseline. If you were going to hire someone, what would that cost an organization? So we keep that, put that on the shelf, and we move to the next portion of the cost modeling. IBM recommends that 13.7% of IT budget be allocated to cybersecurity. The average annual IT budget as a percentage of revenue is 2.7%, and that just changed. We received a new briefing document yesterday from the organization that we grab metrics from, and it actually went down last year as a percentage of revenue to 2.5%. But for here, we'll use the 2.7%. So if you're a $100 million company, IT budget at 2.7% is $2.7 million. Your security budget at 10.6%, that's actually supposed to be 13.7, would be $370,000 annually that you would allocate. So for the program target, I'm looking at somewhere between $100,000 and $400,000 to spend based on the size of the organization. The second thing that we take into consideration is, can we reduce capital expenditure by using a subscription-based OpEx type of model? Where can we get economies of scale with licensing? Meaning if we have volume purchases, for instance, our security awareness training program, we have over 3,000 users now in the program being trained. So the level that we operate under that subscription, we get a reduction in costs, which we pass over to our clients. And then we also want to be able to give our clients the ability to make decisions as to what components of the program satisfy your perception of internal risk. It's not a one-size-fits-all. There is a recommended security maturity model with the plans. We have 3 plans, and we walk you through a foundational type of plan, core controls, into an optimized plan. Those are based on our recommendations. It doesn't mean that you can't make the decision to pick something from plan 3 to include in your program. So that's how we get there. Taking all of this into consideration, we start to build out the program. And then, so now going back to a more technical view of it, I once had a client ask, well, if we sign up for your program, can you guarantee 100% the security? We're going to be secure, we'll never get hacked. And we can't. Quite frankly, there's no 100% guarantee. It's a punch, counter punch type of response. That's why we're on version 2.0, is because hackers have found ways to circumvent the current tools. And now we need to put new tools in place to mitigate that risk. So in an assumed compromise mentality, you're no longer just relying on protection type tools. The boundaries have changed. We're no longer can create a moat around our organization. We have SaaS models, cloud models. Our data is spread in many different places, in many different buckets. So we need to move from just protection to detection and response tools. And that's where the assumed compromise comes in place. Detection would not be necessary unless you were assuming at some point the hackers are going to get behind your boundaries and get on your network. And the reason detect and response is really important is that it drives down recovery time. These are 2 critical metrics that we leverage for the program: mean time to detection, mean time to response. Meaning the shorter those values, the quicker we can detect that a breach has occurred, the quicker we can respond. That means we can recover, we can contain, we can eradicate before that lateral movement begins across the network and additional systems are compromised. So very important metrics for us to measure the efficiency of the program around. And we have had a lot of experience at responding to incidents. So this is 2018, we responded to 48 minor, that means less than 50 hours of effort, and 11 major breaches. That's over 50 hours. And as you can see on the screen, the average incident was about 146 hours, the largest over 500 hours. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reduce that recovery time. 528 hours of effort is extremely costly to our clients. So we want to reduce that as much as we can to make certain that if a breach does occur, assuming compromise, that we can quickly respond and mitigate. So if you recall the kill chain I showed you previously, this is how we have mapped tools, and I'm showing you some of the tools in our toolkit for the program. At each phase of the kill chain, what tool do we have in place to help prevent the attack from occurring or moving across the network? So at the very beginning, one of the things we recommend is Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, which is basically a detonation chamber that any email coming in, it opens the attachment, it looks at the email itself, determines whether any malware is there, and if there are any URLs, it can be configured for safe links. So right out of the gate, the 61% of attacks that start with phishing campaigns, we're putting something in place to help mitigate that. In the next layer, with Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection and Cisco Umbrella, we're trying to prevent that communication to command and control, or at the very least, understand that a breach is imminent, that some exploitation has occurred, and we can see, we're going to get an alert, and we can see the kill chain as it's occurring. So Defender gives us visibility into the kill chain. Umbrella prevents the malware from communicating to known malicious sites or command and control sites. So these tools are the next step, and Umbrella in particular has been very effective in preventing ransomware attacks, where a piece of malware, a bot, gets on your network and is trying to download a package. It prevents that package from being downloaded. And then Azure Sentinel, which is a SIM and SOAR tool that has just been released. I think it was 2 weeks ago, it was released to the general public. That is collecting security logs from log analytics and performing analysis on all of those logs to determine if a breach is underway. That's what a SIM tool does, security event monitoring, and it's looking at all of those security logs and uses big data analysis to make a determination if any of the alerts or logs have anything that looks malicious. The second component of that we really like about Sentinel is that it's also what's called a SOAR tool. So that's an orchestration and response tool, meaning there are playbooks that we can run. So if Sentinel recognizes that an Emotet worm, along with Defender, is on your network, we can run a playbook that quickly contains that breach. So it will take that user's machine off the network, it'll isolate it and contain it while we perform additional triage. Active Directory Premium is identity protection, meaning that we can quickly identify what accounts have been compromised, disable those accounts, and reset those accounts. And then we move into Azure ATP. And Azure ATP is primarily around servers. But what it's doing is it's saying our account's compromised, and it allows us to see the kill chain in terms of identity management and additional accounts being compromised. And then lastly, Cloud App Security gives us the ability to see all of the traffic, everything that people are connecting to on your network. If they're connecting to a SaaS model, to Salesforce, If they're moving files to Dropbox, what type of activity is occurring on the network, and be able to track that and set rules that prevent exfiltration of data. So if a user or a hacker tries to move data that's been tagged as sensitive, and there's a rule that says, well, you can't move that offsite, it can only go to something that's sanctioned by the organization. Can't move it to Dropbox. It will block and prevent that from occurring. So as we looked at the kill chain, this is the other view that we have. How do we put tools in place to help prevent this kill chain from happening at various stages during the attack? So managed services versus point-in-time assessments. I read a book years ago called, you see that in 2007, called Security Metrics. And in the book, the author talked about the hamster wheel of pain. And this little cycle is what people get on. Haven't had a security assessment performed, maybe a year or a couple of years. You really don't understand what your security posture looks like. You ask a vendor to come in and give you that snapshot of where you are. We come back, you fix the problems, and then you get back on the wheel. This gives you a very limited view into your current state, and the shelf life of the information is really only valid for a month or two. With the number of vulnerabilities, if you think back to the vulnerability database, the number of new vulnerabilities that appear on the horizon daily, by the time you've received your assessment, the information is probably outdated. So point-in-time assessments were one of the reasons that we began our security managed solution back in 2015. This is a busy table, and we're going to provide the presentation, so I'm not going to drill into each of these components, but you'll see the difference between continuous monitoring and the point-in-time assessments. I've already mentioned that, there's a shelf life to the information, but it's also about visibility into your security posture on a regular basis, meaning that there are metrics that you can measure yourself. You can build a plan of action over time. You can see trending. You can report to senior leadership. If you need additional funding, whether it's for regulatory compliance or just because you recognize that there are gaps in your current security posture, you have the ability to provide the information and the metrics back to leadership. Point-in-time assessments, you'll see in the fourth row down, I talk about DFS. They require 2 annual security assessments and an annual pen test. When we did the math on the cost of 2 security assessments annually and a pen test, it almost equates to the same cost as enrolling in a continuous monitoring solution. Other business benefits, as a competitive advantage, if we have any clients that are in manufacturing on the call today, there's new regulations coming out next year around a maturity model, meaning in manufacturing, you're going to be required to undergo a third-party audit, and they will label your organization on a scale from 1 to 5 in terms of security maturity. That labeling, if you're labeled as a level 1, an L1, and your contract calls for an L3, you may not be able to keep your contract. If you want to bid on a contract and it's above your maturity level, you can't bid on the contract. So this is where security maturity, and that's just a very evident case of how it can be a competitive advantage. Reporting to leadership, I talked about that, and making certain that we have well-informed leadership in terms of your posture. And we're hearing from more board members asking for the state of security and reporting, at least on a quarterly basis. It allows you to focus on your business. As I mentioned previously, there are a lot of security roles, and it could be a costly endeavor to build on your own. And it also, it's a preventative type of insurance policy. So you may want to focus on your business model and supporting that as opposed to adding another layer of complexity in terms of FTEs within the organization. Lastly, regulatory compliance. We have a number of clients that fall under regulatory that have requirements that need to go through a process to identify where are we in terms of gaps in our control framework. What do we need to do to fill those gaps? As I mentioned earlier, when I was going through the 20 critical controls, you can see that it crosswalks to many of the regulatory compliance frameworks and satisfies the requirements for regulatory. And this is the bonus slide I talked about. So, New York Shield Act. For those that are not familiar with New York Shield yet, it was signed in July, I believe it was July 26th of this year. And it applies to any person or business that owns or licenses computerized data in New York. If you have residence private information, meaning social security numbers, healthcare information, passwords, usernames and passwords, driver license information, any of that where I've got additions to information types. If you're holding any of those information types around a resident in New York, you fall within the New York Shield Act. And that would probably be pretty much every company operating in New York. It also means that companies outside of New York, if they have New York residence information, they are also responsible to maintain the privacy of that information. And one of the things that I think a lot of companies in New York State may not be aware of, there are 8 other states around the United States that have similar rules. So if you operate in Ohio, for instance, and you have a breach, you need to report to the state of Ohio on that breach as well. So breach notification, this is the first thing up in terms of the regulation. October 23rd, it comes into effect. And currently, a breach is defined as unauthorized acquisition of the information, meaning you only needed to report it if you were confident that the information had been taken off-site. Today, they've changed that to unauthorized access to the information, meaning if you view the information, if you know that a hacker was on your network and there was a possibility that they viewed any of this information, you need to notify the state. So as I mentioned, the last bullet point is it applies to anyone holding New York State residents' private information. And then the security control requirements, which are in March of next year that are going to be applied, they're saying that you need to maintain reasonable administrative, technical, and physical security safeguards around all of this private information. If you already fall within, for instance, New York State DFS or any of the federally regulated compliance, DFARS, for instance, then you're grandfathered in. You don't have to create another framework. Those will satisfy the requirements for security control, but you need to be fully compliant with those controls. Hopefully that helps a little bit. We're going to do a full webinar on the New York Shield Act in November. So look for that on your calendars coming up. So, and finally, cost savings. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of cost in building it on your own. So one thing to consider is, do you want to invest in security or do you want to outsource it and embed it into your organization? We have had great success in meshing IT departments with our security team so that they become one operational team. And so it's something to investigate, looking at building your own versus a managed service provider, and what are the benefits to your organization. So what does our program look like? Protect, detect, respond, as we mentioned earlier, are the compelling components that we're trying to mitigate. It starts with, and we made a decision to move to Microsoft Security Solutions. Microsoft is the largest security company in the world. They have acquired a number of security tools from other organizations that develop tools. In particular, there were some companies in Israel that had developed some very strong security solutions, and they acquired them and have brought them into the mix. So it starts with Azure Sentinel as a SIEM tool and SOAR tool. We add Office 365 and Microsoft 365 tools to the mix. Azure Monitor, which is the log analytics tool that pulls the logs into Sentinel, and all of the advanced threat protection tools. So Office 365, Microsoft Defender, and Azure Defender ATP tools, as well as Cloud App Security, which I talked about earlier. We have some strategic partners that we work with as well. So Qualys for vulnerability scanning and management. It is the scanner that we place on site to perform the daily scans of all of your systems to look at vulnerabilities, configuration, misconfigurations, and we feed that into another partner called Nucleus, and this is where we embed with our clients. We don't want to be the wizard behind the curtain. We want to give you access to the same information that we're parsing through and providing in our quarterly reports. So Nucleus gives us the ability to present vulnerability dashboards to our clients and allow them access to those dashboards so they can follow along. When we set up alerting in the program, the alerts go to our help center for early review and triage, and they also go to our clients. So on a daily basis, if you have new high or critical vulnerabilities and you want to go look at what those are and what systems are affected, you'll be able to go in and look in the Nucleus dashboard at those at that information. Cisco Umbrella, which is the secure web content filtering component that I mentioned earlier, the dashboard for that, you will have access to that, as well as KnowBe4, which is our security awareness training platform that we leverage. KnowBe4 has over 900 training modules, and they go across regulatory. They have other types of tools like videos and gamification. Very strong platform. It is #1 on the Gartner list in terms of security training, awareness training organizations. The other thing that we leverage out of KnowBe4 is we perform semi-annual phishing campaigns, and those are embedded directly into the KnowBe4 platform. So if a user clicks on a URL or opens or gives up data during a phishing campaign, they automatically get enrolled into remedial training in the KnowBe4 platform. So while they may have gone through their annual training, they'll get a 10-minute primer on phishing. We like that automation that comes with the KnowBe4 platform. So these are the strategic partners, and these are the plan options that I mentioned earlier. There are 3 plans for recommended maturity. Plan 1, vulnerability management, which are the Qualys and Nucleus tools. Security awareness training, KnowBe4. Office 365 email protection, the advanced threat protection that I mentioned, as well as secure score hardening. For those who may not understand secure score, it is a way for Microsoft to evaluate what controls you have in place to protect the whole Office 365 suite of tools. So email, SharePoint, OneDrive, all of those tools. And it rates you based on what controls have you put in place that are available to you. Things like multi-factor authentication for global admins or users, spam filtering, and it gives you a score. When we first looked at Secure Score, out of a potential score of 450, the international average was a 31. So there was a lot of room for improvement. Part of what we do in the program is actually implementing controls within 365 that will get you to a score of around 350. So we think that's a sweet spot. And then incident response as a service. As I mentioned earlier, we perform incident response, but because of the sheer volume of incidents that we were engaged in, 2 of those large breaches were overlapping. We decided that we needed to create a subscription for incident response. And so an SLA tied to incident response is only if you are in the part of the subscription for incident response. Now, security MITS clients, because we're performing managed services around security, you automatically get enrolled into the subscription without any additional fee for that program. Anyone else that wants to subscribe to our incident response program, there is a monthly fee associated with that. So being part of the program, there's a real benefit. As you move up to Plan 2, we add the Sentinel and Azure Log Analytics component. So that's the SIM tool and Cisco Umbrella Web Content Filtering to the mix. And then in Plan 3 is the Microsoft M365 stack. So all of the Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection, Azure Advanced Threat Protection, Cloud App Security, Azure AD Premium, P2, all of those components come into the mix. So we find this to be a good ramp-up type program for clients to begin with foundational controls that protect breaches like phishing attacks and basic vulnerability management to more advanced capabilities that come with Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection. Hopefully that everybody understands that. And that is the presentation. Hopefully everybody understands the program. I know that's a lot of information that we've disseminated. We will be having a follow-up webinar on the 31st of this month. That will be a more technical deep dive into each of the tools. So we're going to explain the tools in a little more detail, as well as demonstrate the dashboards that are associated with those tools. So while I talked you through the kill chain and our ability to see the kill chain, we'll actually show you what that looks like in Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection. We'll show you what the Know Before dashboard looks like and the automation that's involved there. So hopefully you'll all join us again for the technical deep dive, and I appreciate your attending. Thank you.